What if the deepest question has no answer? And that is the point. There's a question that has been waiting at the end of every video in this series. A question that was present, quietly, beneath everything we explored about the self, about time, about consciousness, about quantum reality, about the origin of the universe, about nothingness, about space, about light, about black holes, about entanglement. A question so fundamental that every other question rests on top of it. A question so simple that a child can ask it, and so deep that no philosopher, no physicist, no tradition of human wisdom has ever fully answered it. Why is there something rather than nothing? Not how did the universe begin, not what is it made of, not how old is it, or how large is it, or what will happen to it in the end. But the prior question, the question that comes before all of those, the question that asks not about the properties of existence, but about the fact of existence itself. Why does anything exist at all? And the honest answer, the answer that emerges when you follow this question to its very end, when you refuse to be satisfied with partial explanations, when you sit with it long enough to feel its full weight, is that no one knows. Not because we lack the data, not because the instruments are not sensitive enough, not because the mathematics has not yet been developed, but because this question may be of a different kind than all the other questions science has ever answered. Every other question asks about something within existence, about a property, a structure, a behavior, a cause. This question asks about existence itself, and existence cannot explain itself the way a thing within it can. You cannot step outside of being to ask why there is being, because the asking itself is an act of being. The question contains itself, and that is where things get genuinely strange. Because throughout the history of philosophy, the attempts to answer this question have followed two paths. The first says that existence requires a cause, that nothing comes from nothing, that something must have always existed, that there is a necessary being, a first cause, a ground of all grounds that exists by its own nature and could not have failed to exist. This is the path of classical theology, of Leibniz and Aquinas, of the cosmological argument in all its forms. It is a serious answer. It has been taken seriously by serious minds for thousands of years. But it does not dissolve the question. It moves it. Because if something must have always existed, if there is a necessary being that could not have failed to exist, then why that? Why is the necessary being this one rather than another? Why does the ground of all existence have the nature it has rather than some other nature? The question does not disappear. It retreats one level deeper, and at that level it is exactly as unanswerable as before. The second path says that the question itself may be malformed, that nothing, true, absolute, complete nothingness, may be not just rare but impossible, that the quantum vacuum, as we explored in the video on nothingness, is never truly empty, that the laws of physics may be necessary rather than contingent, not a set of rules that could have been otherwise, but the only coherent structure that existence can take. That in the space of all possible mathematical structures, something like our universe was inevitable. This is the path of Stephen Hawking's no-boundary proposal, of Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis, of the physicists who argue that asking what came before the universe is like asking what is north of the North Pole. But this path also does not dissolve the question, because even if the laws of physics are necessary, even if something like our universe was inevitable, there is still something rather than nothing. The mathematical structure exists. And why does it exist rather than not exist? Why is there a space of possible structures at all? Why is there anything for mathematics to describe? The question remains. It always remains. And perhaps that is telling us something important. Perhaps the reason this question cannot be answered from within existence is not a failure of human intelligence or a limitation of current science. Perhaps it is a structural feature of the question itself. Perhaps existence, the simple, bare fact that there is something rather than nothing, is not the kind of thing that has a cause in the ordinary sense. Not because it is random or arbitrary, but because causation is itself a feature of existence. It is something that happens within existence. And the existence of existence cannot be caused by something within existence without already assuming the existence that is supposed to be explained. The question eats itself. And when a question eats itself, when it dissolves under its own weight, what remains is not an answer. It is silence. Not the silence of ignorance, not the silence of having given up, but a different kind of silence. The silence that remains when a question that was never going to be answered by more thinking finally stops demanding more thinking. The silence in which something else becomes possible. And this is the place where physics and philosophy and contemplative wisdom have always eventually arrived together. Because the mystic who sits in silence and finds that the question, why does anything exist, dissolves not into an answer, but into a direct recognition of existence itself, who finds that the asking falls away, and what remains is simply this, simply now, simply the bare fact of being aware, is not failing to answer the question. They are discovering that the question was pointing here all along, not to an explanation, but to an encounter. Because you cannot explain existence from outside of it, but you can recognize it from inside. You can turn attention from the contents of experience, the thoughts, the sensations, the questions, the theories, to the fact of experience itself, to the simple, undeniable, prior to everything else fact that there is awareness. That something is happening, that existence is not absent, and in that recognition, which is not a thought, not a conclusion, not an answer in the ordinary sense, something of the question dissolves, not because it has been solved, but because the one who is asking it has seen something more immediate than any answer could provide. The question was always pointing at the questioner, and the questioner, looked at directly, is not a thing that needs to be explained. It is the fact of existence itself, aware of itself, wondering at itself, from the inside. This is what every video in this series has been building toward. Not a conclusion, not a final theory, not a belief system or a philosophy or a set of ideas to carry around, but an invitation to look directly, without assumptions, without the need for an answer, at the most immediate and most mysterious fact in all of existence. The fact that you are here. The fact that there is something rather than nothing. The fact that existence knows itself, through you, right now. And that is not the end of the questions. It is the beginning of a different kind of looking, one that does not need the questions to stop, but that is no longer trapped inside them.